Over the space of only 2 years, Irhabi 007 became the undisputed, undefeated king of internet terrorism.
This war is not only being fought on the ground in Iraq, but also in cyberspace.
This is the story of a man who called himself Terrorist 007, a man who used the internet to build a network of terror stretching from Iraq to Canada, from the United States to Bosnia, all from his bedroom in London.
He, I think it's not unreasonable to say, provided a link between core Al-Qaeda, the heart of Al-Qaeda, and the wider networks that he was linking into through the internet.
The story of Terrorist 007 reveals how virtual terrorist networks can emerge out of sight of the authorities and not only radicalize young Muslims online, but also help them carry out terrorist attacks. Younes Tsouli arrived in London with his father from Morocco in 2001. He enrolled at this small college in the city of London to study IT. He was a loner who soon started using his newfound skills to surf the internet. He viewed footage like this, taken from the cockpit of a US fighter jet, as evidence of a Western plan to wipe out Muslims across the world. It's alleged that the film shows innocent Iraqi civilians being killed in Fallujah. The real facts are unclear.
Impact. Oh, dude.
It was from his bedroom in this house on an ordinary road in West London that Younes Tsouli went from being another angry young man to one of the most notorious cyber jihadists in the world. He would use the internet to spread fear and hatred across the globe. By 2004, Tsouli had assumed the username of Irhabi 007, Irhabi meaning terrorist in Arabic. He posted advice on hacking and uploaded videos of Osama bin Laden onto US government websites. This attracted attention. Aaron Weisberg monitors extremist Islamic activity on the internet from his home in the US.
Well, I first came across him because he was active on a forum on the internet that I was monitoring. It was called the Islamic Terrorist Forum. I mean, that was the official name of the website. And he demonstrated a degree of technical knowledge. He demonstrated a concern on that site for the security of the community, and he demonstrated a high degree of paranoia.
Extremists also began to recognize Tsouli's potential. As Iraq descended into violence, Al-Qaeda's leaders there contacted Tsouli. They asked him to build websites for them. Tsouli's contribution was invaluable, according to one expert on internet terrorism who testified in Tsouli's trial last year.
Irhabi 007 was essentially a fixer for Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Al-Qaeda elsewhere, an online fixer, someone who took care of tasks that Al-Qaeda couldn't do on its own. He had a flair for marketing, and he had the technical knowledge and skills to be able to place this stuff in areas on the internet where it wouldn't get easily erased.
Suicide attacks were filmed in Iraq and emailed to Tsouli, who posted them on websites across the world, but these were often closed down. Tsouli needed a constant supply of money to pay for new sites. He was helped by this man, Wasim Mughal, a British biochemistry undergraduate, and another man from West London, Tariq Al-Dour. Tsouli and Al-Dour never met in person, but Al-Dour had access to over 100,000 stolen credit cards and supplied money to Tsouli. By now, Irhabi 007 was a central player in Al-Qaeda's propaganda war against the West, and he didn't mind who knew it.
Over the space of only 2 years, Irhabi 007 became the undisputed, undefeated king of internet terrorism. His name is ubiquitous when it comes to cyber terrorism, modern cyber terrorism.
Tsouli's postings became more and more alarming, offering instructions to jihadis wanting to know how to get into Iraq, and information on making explosives. But it was his links to terrorist networks that underlined how dangerous he was becoming. Spring 2005, a group of young Muslim men meet in the Canadian city of Toronto. It's alleged that some of them had been communicating with Tsouli and that they were now meeting to discuss blowing up targets in the US. Two of the men, who were American, then travelled to Washington, D.C. They recorded a number of what prosecutors claim are reconnaissance videos. These included shots of Capitol Hill and the World Bank. Afterwards, they emailed the video to Tsouli in London. The fact that Younes Tsouli was sent the video shot here in Washington shows that he'd moved beyond being a mere propagandist. Now he was using the internet to build a network of people alleged to be planning actual attacks. Throughout 2005, Tsouli was becoming increasingly active, but he was growing frustrated. He yearned to fight in Iraq and was tired of having to constantly buy more web space. It was Tsouli's links to a terror plot in the Balkans that led to his arrest. In the autumn of 2005, two members of a group calling itself Al-Qaeda in Northern Europe travelled to Bosnia from their homes in Scandinavia. They had been in contact with Tsouli on his web forum. A few days after they arrived in Sarajevo, they found a safe house. Through local contacts, they bought guns and explosives. They selected a number of military targets and recorded this chilling suicide video explaining their plans.
This weapon is going to be used against Europe, against those who have their forces in Iraq and in Afghanistan.
But the men were under surveillance, and the plot was disrupted. When Bosnian police raided this apartment, they found nearly 30 kilograms of explosives and a suicide belt. And when they examined the telephone records of the main suspect, they found that the last call he made was to a man in West London. British police were alerted and traced the number to a residential street in Shepherd's Bush, the home of Younes Tsouli. They raided the flat and after a scuffle arrested Tsouli, but they had no idea that the man they'd caught was terrorist 007. As officers entered, he'd been working on his computer, designing a website called youbomit.com. It took months of painstaking computer forensic work, including the viewing of 1 million files from his computer, to realise how important he was. They also found a PowerPoint presentation on how to make a car bomb and instructions on how to make a suicide vest. The evidence led police across the world to other alleged terrorist groups that had been in contact with Tsouli. A group of men were arrested in Denmark, accused of supporting the suicide mission in Sarajevo. 17 young men in Canada were picked up on suspicion of plotting to attack targets there. And police arrested the 2 men from the United States who allegedly sent the reconnaissance video to Tsouli. For British police too, the Tsouli case was a watershed.
What it did show us was the extent to which they could actually conduct operational planning on the internet. It was the first virtual conspiracy to murder that we'd seen.
And it's emerged that Tsouli was indirectly linked to terrorist suspects in the UK. 3 separate anti-terrorism investigations have led to convictions. Each group was linked to Tsouli and his cell by a website called Atibian. Yassine Nassari from West London, convicted of storing instructions on his computer on how to build homemade rockets. Mohammed Sadiq, who from his home in Scotland ran extremist websites showing how to make explosives. And this group of Muslim students from Bradford University. From their communal house, they watched extremist DVDs. Younes Tsouli is now serving a 16-year sentence at Belmarsh High Security Prison in London, where he's denied access to the internet. The evidence against him and his co-conspirators was so overwhelming they pleaded guilty to incitement to commit acts of terrorism on the internet. From his cell he wrote to his father saying death would have been better than prison.